This week, free expression columnists Louise and Meghan Gurdon both took inspiration from the World Cup in very different ways. Meghan thinks this summer feels like old times, with people coming together in familiar, if forgotten ways, over sports and movies.
This summer, we've had a return to a kind of central narrative. There have been a few things that a lot of people have been following with exuberance and good nature and good humor. And that is, one is the World Cup, which has just been a fantastic demonstration of kind of fun national unity. You know, the Scots drinking Boston Dry and swaggering around in their wonderful kilts and singing, enchanting people with their songs. The way that the Norwegians have been rowing their way like Vikings across the country, which is really so charming. And, the English dressing up as lions and as crusaders wearing the Red Cross of St. George on their chests. And there's been a kind of exuberance that we haven't seen for a long time. The other great event, of course, is Christopher Nolan's film of The Odyssey, which is in its way highly polarizing. But again, it's polarizing in a way which allows people to discuss it without getting really furious at each other. We've had such a fractured time since really the internet has dropped us all into our little silos. We're all of us so accustomed to using our phones, to receiving entertainment from outside, that there's we're all kind of a little famished for connection. The Odyssey is one of the great foundational texts of Western civilization. The story of a man battling obstacles, including himself, to get back to where he needs to be, is something that underlies so much of our literature. And so many of the ideas that we think of as Western ideas. And this is one reason why the woke activists wanted to eliminate the Odyssey from the education of children in American schools, American public schools particularly. One of the brilliant things about this film is that it has got young Americans who were denied Homer in school going to the texts, buying them, and reading not just one, but reading multiple translations, comparing the translations, listening to it in audio, which is, of course, I would argue, the greatest way to experience Homer. The fact that this film is being made has reignited the interest of young people in this fantastic story. And they have found that it is not some dull, tired, dusty, old patriarchal work of nonsense, but a thrilling epic that engages the heart and the mind and, your own emotions. I have qualms with some aspects of the film, as does everybody who has seen it, I think. It is also true that I found myself driving 3 hours round trip so I could get tickets on the first day. It's been a great summer for rediscovering the fun of being together, rooting at sport events. We had not only our own 250th anniversary, which for some people was a little bit of a fraught experience, those who don't maybe feel the patriotic heart beating quite so hard in their chests. But, when a stranger comes in and says, my word, look at this wonderful place where you live. Look at your air conditioning. Look at how friendly everybody is. Look at the beauty of your country and look how big the portions are. That's kind of encouraging. It's kind of lovely to see. And I think it's really raised people's spirits.
Louise freely admits that she isn't a sports fan, but she gets the appeal of sports and understands that when teams face off on the playing field, there's often more happening than meets the eye.
So I'm not a sports fan. Okay, I don't know anything about sport. I was asked recently whether I would be watching the World Cup, and my instinctive and stupid response was to say I'd never seen a whole episode of football before. I'm not anti-sport. I think that clearly sport brings people a lot of joy, and I think also that it performs some really useful social functions, which I think are really interesting. And it's very telling, I think, that the majority of sports fans are male. You have to be kind of careful with the stats here because there are also lots of women who watch sports. But when you look at things like people who describe themselves as the most avid sports fans, season ticket holders, people who are really, really committed to sports, they skew male. Most progressives really don't like that fact and generally regard it as a product of malign social forces rather than anything innate to do with men and women's interests. And the progressives are not completely wrong because Title IX has actually made a really big difference in terms of the participation of American girls and women in high school and college sport. But at the same time, once girls and women leave education, they tend to stop watching sports so much, they tend to stop participating in it so much. There is a real difference in terms of how interested men and women are, and I think that stereotype rings true with all of our experiences. There's a very interesting evolutionary psychology explanation for this. Men are evolved to specialize in hunting and fighting. It's not that women can't hunt and fight, it's that historically men were the ones who were primarily tasked with performing those roles, which are very important for the community. That's why men are so much stronger than women. Men on average have twice as much upper body strength as women, and men are also faster and more aggressive and have all sorts of other traits on average which make them better suited to hunting and fighting. One theory as to why sports has emerged as a human practice and is seen all over the world, and why also you see all over the world that it is primarily men who participate in sports and watch sports, is because it's like a safe space in which to practice the skills necessary for hunting and fighting. So throwing projectiles, dodging, tackling, particularly with team sports, being tactical and cooperating with other people. And part of the reason why it's interesting to watch sports is because it's a setting where you can assess other members of your community and see how good they are at doing all these tasks. So for men, they can watch sportsmen and they can assess who would make a good ally, who would make a fearsome rival. For women, they can watch men play sports and they can assess who make a good mate. And I think this probably explains partly why women's sports are just persistently less popular in terms of viewership. I think deep down, we get that sports are a kind of play acting of war. That, I think, is the origin of what's called in British politics the Tebbit test. So Norman Tebbit was a conservative British politician. He gave an interview to the LA Times in 1990 in which he outlined what he described as the cricket test. So if an immigrant to Britain persisted in not supporting England in the cricket, but instead was supporting, say, India, the country of their parents' birth, then Tebbit suggested that they weren't fully integrated, that it cast doubt on their allegiance to England. What it's portraying there is that sport is like a way of simulating warfare, therefore reveals not only people's talents as potential warriors or as potential hunters, but it also reveals people's deep allegiances. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even if you're not really interested in watching sports, I'm not, you should still pay attention to it as a very interesting area of human experience.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in your inbox.